Advocacy for this Proactive Defense Solutions. I am talking to Jonathan Wright, the CEO of the Firearms Policy Campaign. Tonight we're going to be discussing the origins of safe storage and proficiency training for firearms in South Africa. Jonathan, good evening.
Yeah, good evening, Rian. Good to see you again.
Always. Thank you for your time. Let's start with a little history here. When did the concept of safe firearms storage first become a formal concern in South Africa, and what events or trends prompted this shift?
So the concept of safe storage goes back to the 1960s, really. I think it's 1965 that it gets suggested for the first time in Parliament that then there maybe should be some kind of safe storage requirement by way of safes for firearm owners. And this is largely in the context of, I think, the domestic context. So there were concerns about unauthorized access by children, which I think is a very reasonable concern to have. But ultimately, the government at that time didn't think it was worth the effort. They weren't sure how they would enforce it. They thought the police had more important things to do. And it was also in the minds of many, the government at least, an easily solvable problem. Just put your gun on a high shelf, keep the ammunition separate, because then if the child does get the gun, well, then it's just a piece of metal at that point. So it seemed very practical approach to things. The government really wasn't that concerned about it. By 1969, there's a rationale of control within South African firearm regulation, and that originates, it goes back to the colonial era, but it really starts taking form in 1937 in a national centralized sense. And with the Arms and Ammunition Act of 1969, we have the Central Firearms Register, and now they need to keep this register accurate, but they're still not going to mandate safe storage yet. They're not that concerned about. Firearm losses are becoming ever more of a concern in the government. They get repeated in more and more every debate, every amendment that comes along. People start getting more concerned about this. By 1983, now they're starting to take the topic a lot more seriously. It's already an offense to not report a lost or stolen firearm, which is part of this controlling narrative, because they need to keep the register accurate. So if you lose your gun or it gets stolen, you need to tell the police so they can mark it as such on the register. But the concept of safe storage is becoming closer and closer aligned so that you don't lose it in the first place or it doesn't get stolen. But again, 1983, the government is still, they're flirting with the idea, but they're not willing to do it. It's still too expensive. They don't understand. They're not sure how they're going to practically implement it. But by 1988, things, as most people probably guess, are starting to really fall apart in South Africa. A couple of states of emergencies later, violent crime is soaring through the roof. You've got a low simmering civil war at this point in the country. And the government now is like, okay, now we're done. We're getting terrified. Firearm losses have gone from maybe 1,000 or 2,000 a year to nearly 10,000. They're getting really concerned now. They've always had this link in their minds that firearm proliferation causes crime and violence, or at least certainly moderates the lethality of it. But there's a causal link in their mind. And their idea is, look, if we can just stop firearms from being stolen or lost, they will stop going to the bad guys, and then the violence will go down. And that's the same logic we see today. If we just stop giving the criminals guns, they'll stop killing people, which we know is not going to happen. So to actually, I've rambled a little bit, but to give a more concise answer to your question, what events or trends prompted it? Loss of firearms and the perceived impact that that had on causing violence. So the logic is, if we just stop the loss and theft, we'll stop the violence. And so they mandated safe storage in 1988. For the first time, they finally got over themselves and like, okay, we're going to do it. It was suddenly worth the trouble. By 1994, they make regulations on what safes should look like. They've even created a certificate of competence in 1988 as part of this, about the safe handling of firearms. But it never actually got implemented, or if it did, it was very haphazard. And we move from there to the Firearms Control Act, where we repeal everything that's come up to this point. There's hysteria about lost and stolen firearms. This idea that firearms cause crime and violence is now on steroids. There's paranoia around the topic. And the safe storage requirements get even stricter. Competency is properly implemented now. It's actually makes sense. It's not as haphazard as it was previously. But perhaps I am running ahead of you and other questions you may have, because I think I've answered the core element of your question.
I think
The government was concerned about loss and theft because they thought it was causing crime. So
okay. So let's talk about proficiency trading. How did it evolve over the years in South Africa? You started touching on that now. And was there a time when this was a completely informal or even an optional thing to do?
So yeah, as I mentioned, a certificate of competence was introduced together with safe storage in 1988, but it wasn't properly implemented. I couldn't find in the regulations to the old Arms and Ammunition Act any reference to a certificate of competence. So I don't think it is, but you still find people who might say that they ask like, hey, is this competence certificate from 1993 still valid or something? And it's like, interesting. Okay. So clearly some people have it, but most people don't. My father didn't. He got his gun in 1993. But then yes, the Firearms Control Act came along and it became now it became institutionalized. It's part of the law. You have to have it. It's got a whole accreditation standard, and end to end, you can't get around it. Until this time, yes, it was an optional thing. You could do it if you wanted. You didn't have to do it. But from 2004, with the Firearms Control Act coming into effect, yeah, you can't get it. You need it. You have to have it. It's mandatory at that point.
What role did government legislation play, touching on that, like the FCA of 2000, in shaping both safe storage laws and mandatory proficiency training?
So on the safe storage laws, let's start there. As mentioned in that first answer, the very long answer I gave, admittedly, the government wasn't really sure how to approach the topic of safe storage. And one of the reasons for that was they were concerned about the affordability and the impact it would have on poor firearm owners. And so when they did introduce it in 1988, I mean, this was one of the explicit concerns that some people in Parliament had. And the government's response was to say, we're going to use very wide wording. So to give people options on what constitutes compliant safe storage so that they are not declared unfit if it gets stolen or something like that happens. When the Firearms Control Act came along, they changed the game. Suddenly, they weren't using wide terminology anymore. It was very exact, reference to SABS standards at this point. And there's no getting around it. And these probably are a little more onerous than necessary because the exact purpose of safe storage is not, I don't think it's properly understood. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to stop a criminal from getting to the firearm? Or are you just trying to increase the safety in the domestic context of unauthorized access? I think that if the goal is to prevent criminal acquisition, it's maybe going a bit too far. They will get it if they want, and even if they can't get your firearm, they'll get someone else's, or they'll get it from somewhere else. So we need to really understand what we're exactly trying to achieve here, and then we can actually tailor the situation in a way that it doesn't have such an impact on people. So yeah, the Firearms Control Act really ratcheted up things and made it a lot more exacting, very explicit. It's similar to the 1988 requirements, but now you've got these SABS standards that you have to deal with. with proficiency training, I think I also just answered that in the previous question. Now it's a very detailed system that was actually part of the law, whereas the old law required it from 1988. They never really seemed to get around to actually implementing it.
Could you dig up anything on this? Like, you know, were there ever any key incidents, public safety concerns, political adoptions of these standards in South Africa?
So the motivation was always just loss and theft. When you read through the Parliament Hansards, this topic keeps on coming up, and you still get it today. And it's a perpetual problem, but it's also an inevitable problem. Firearms are small objects; they are going to get lost. And the government seems to have this idea, what I call these notions, these hubristic notions of control. They seem to have this idea that they can actually stop our losses and thefts, which they clearly can't. I'm not exactly sure why there was such an explosion in the rates of reported loss and thefts in the 1980s and 70s, where it went from a few thousand to over 10,000. Almost, it looked like overnight, because for decades before that, it was like maybe 1.5 to 2,000 firearms going missing, and now suddenly it's over 10,000. And the 1990s in South Africa were also a very turbulent period, where rates did seem to go up quite a lot, and then things calmed down. They came down without seeming need of the Firearms Control Act, really. I think it has had an impact on reducing rates of loss and theft, but whether that has translated into lower rates of violence, I don't think so, because firearms don't cause violence. We kind of know that by now. They just maybe moderate the lethality of it. But a lot more research really needs to go into that. But it all comes down to the paranoia. The Hansards, again, there is just an absolute hysteria around illegal firearms, a term that I don't like because I don't think it actually means anything. Firearms can only be lawfully or unlawfully possessed. They cannot be legal or illegal in and of themselves. But yeah, it's really just comes down to trying to stop loss and theft. And that's the absolute goal of it. Obviously, they can only maybe reduce it.
Last question on this topic. How have civilian gun owners, trainers, and organizations responded to these changes over time in terms of pushback, support, or adaptation?
There hasn't really been any pushback at all. Not that there necessarily needs to be. I think everybody inherently, or at least any reasonable and serious person, accepts the reasonable nature of safe storage at home. You should lock up your firearms when they're not under your direct control. I think where there could be pushback is in how we conceptualize what safe storage looks like, because depending on who you are in society, it can be a very expensive thing. And when the Firearms Control Act was written, an explicit purpose of the Firearms Control Act was to make firearm ownership as difficult, onerous, and expensive as possible to discourage as much firearm ownership as possible. And I think that it has largely been effective to that end. I mean, the barriers to the entry for firearm ownership are very high in South Africa, but once you get over them, it becomes a lot easier and more straightforward. But it's that initial barrier that becomes the problem. So there hasn't been much pushback at all, if any. I don't think there needs to be too much. I do think we should maybe think about how stringent we want to make it. These laws, and as your question ended there on the adaption word you used, I do think that there is some scope to consider how we make exceptions, so that it's not these super stringent rules that we have. But this it should not undermine the point that we need to have some degree of safe storage requirements. It is just inherently desirable for responsible firearm ownership.
And that's the bottom line. It must be responsible. Jonathan, thank you. I'm going to end there. And again, for the viewers, we will have the details of the Firearms Policy Campaign up on the screen for the duration of the video to make it easy for you to find them. Do give them a follow. Get in contact with Jonathan. See if you can get behind their cause and help getting this whole thing off the ground. From my side, if you are interested in any of the loan operator training, there is always a link in the description below. Do click on that, find out more, and we hope to see you on a range one of these days. As always, you know the story. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click on that bell icon so that you can get reminders of all the new videos coming out. Jonathan, thank you so much for your time. I highly appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Rian. Looking forward to the next topic we discuss, whatever that is.